How are you,
Hi,
Marley?
I'm good, thank you. I went for a walk to kind of like calm down, to like had a bit of nerves. I went for a walk, as I was saying to you in the messages, and then I got too relaxed, and then got back. I was like, oh, it's like in a second, and then I was like running around everywhere.
Well, yeah, we're all good. We're all good.
Yeah.
Um, I'll just start by saying thank you to everyone for joining us this evening, and particularly thank you to Marley Starsky Butler, who is our star for this evening. This conversation is part of a series of In Conversations that have been organised by the East Meets West Masterclass programme participants, which is a bit of a mouthful to say. For those who don't know, East Meets West is a masterclass program organised by Grain Projects, who I work for, and also Format Photography Festival and Quad in Derby. And just to begin with, just to say thanks to our sponsors and supporters, that's Arts Council England, Birmingham City University, Derby University, and the New Art Gallery Warsaw. But this evening, as I said, we have Marley here with us, and we're going to be discussing Marley's work. Just to get us going, I'm just going to read out Marley's bio, and then we're going to start a conversation about Marley's incredible breadth of work, not only photography, but performance, spoken word, film, dance. So there's a lot to get through tonight. So thank you everyone for joining us. So Marley Starsky Butler is Birmingham based, raised by Wolverhampton, nurtured by Derby and born in Leeds. He makes art, in particular visual, audio and performance works, to explore opposites, parallels, memory, love, loss, mortality, and the politics of belonging in self and in society. So, Marley.
I've never heard someone read that out. So that's like, so it was funny. I was like, oh yeah, yeah, it's all right.
Just to kind of kick us off, do you want to
Mhm.
how did you kind of get into photography, or I suppose with your kind of broad practice,
Mm.
wider arts, where did your kind of passion start? Yeah, where did that kind of first develop?
Um, it it developed specifically like in terms of kind of making the decision about photography came in 2018. I would say before that, I kind of like tapped it, if that's a good way of explaining it. I started off, music was my initial main method of expression and creativity initially. Through that, I would like getting into video and like making music videos and doing bits and pieces and filming things. So I've always had like a camera. So I always had like a DSLR camera that I always had, but I only used it for the video function. So I never really thought about photography. I just always had a camera, but never took photos really. At different points in that time, say in the last 12 years or 10 years, I'd use the camera function from time to time. And then the last time, so there's always like little tiny periods. I was like, oh, I would take photos in the day, and I'd be like, I quite like this whole like photo thing. This is pretty cool. And then it would kind of go away again. But then the last time that happened in 2018, it kind of, well, it like didn't go away. So at that point, I made like a clear decision. I was like, I really like this, and I'm going to buy another camera, which was just for taking photos. And I'm going to learn about photography, like learn about the history of photography, learn about what it is as a particular art form. So around that time, that's when I definitely fell in love with photography, and it's kept me in it. So it's then become like part of my wider art practice, and I can't really see it going anywhere. So it's pretty. I like it a lot. It's really good. Yeah.
Good, good.
Yeah.
Um, and I think maybe you should let everyone know as well about your kind of wider art practice and kind
Mm,
of, because yeah, your work is incredibly broad and rich,
mm.
and yeah, I think yeah, if people haven't already looked at Marley's work, please do go on his website. Brilliant a range of works. But yeah, where does your kind of, I suppose, love for just the arts in general. You've done a lot of spoken word, performance works, dance works.
Hmm.
Where's the root of that?
Oh, the root of that's probably a long story. Like it could go in various different directions. So I'm gonna try my best. So I would say I could start from a really funny place, or I could skip the funny bit and then I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna start in an odd bit that might sound odd. So, um, was it sixth form or year? I think it was in sixth form. We had this thing called enrichment, where you had to like pick an activity to do like every Wednesday. I don't know why I'm telling this story. Anyway, yeah, I had to pick an activity every Wednesday. It starts off very shallow, then gets semi-deep, and then it's hilarious. But anyway, whatever. So I had to pick an activity, and the two of the activities, one was like going to the gym, another one was like music lessons, like a guitar lessons and things like this. And initially, like I grew up within like music and creative, as most people do in terms of music being around them, but I wasn't massively interested in it in terms of doing it myself. So I chose going to the gym. So then I went to the gym in Wolverhampton. This is in Wolverhampton. So this is the gym that was on Miss Cineworld for anyone watching from Wolverhampton. But and I didn't like the gym because I got told off at the gym for whatever reason, and I didn't like it, so I stopped. So then I went to have guitar lessons, and then as I was there, I kind of saw a bass, and I kind of preferred that. And then I had like 10 lessons of like music there, and then that was what initially was made. That was what initially had the thing in mind of like expressing myself through music, in terms of art. And initially, it was very much a purely therapeutic practice. Like it wasn't anything to do with the art world in any way, or even like the world of music. It was a purely very internal therapeutic practice that I very much needed to do because of a very complex history of childhood and things like this, and things that I was going through at that time. So that was when I started expressing myself through music. And then as the years went by, different people, I would like make music and like share it with like individuals, like partners I had at the time or friends. So like only a couple of people would hear those things, and then they would then push me to like make a MySpace, if you remember MySpace, for the old people in the room. And I'd always like make a MySpace, but then take it down. I was always a bit weird with having these acts of therapy even being in the world, because to me there was no need for that. Do you know what I mean? So it was other people that kind of pushed me in that direction. And at one point I kind of made an album. Oh, how old was I? I was in my late teens, early 20s, I think. I made an album and I shared it with a few friends and a partner at the time, and they were like, oh, you should I had this feeling where they had the same feeling from my music that I had from the artists that definitely helped me and kind of saved my life in and around that time. So I started to gain that feeling along of like, but like, what if the artists who I massively love were like me? What if they were just like, oh, I'll just make this thing and like just help myself and just be at home and do nothing. You know what I mean? So that, and then I wouldn't have been able to have those things. So there's one particular story where there was like, oh, you should send this album to like a label or whatever. This was like very kind of like young, naive kind of thinking. And I was like, no, why would I do that? Whatever. So I just happened to be listening to this podcast where this guy had this little independent label called Entract in London, which are now based in Belgium, I think. So I was like, oh, I'll send it to him because he sounds cool. So I sent it to him, and then he released it, and it was really random. And then so he did like a really short run. I wonder whether something's gonna fall off here now, maybe.
Yeah, let's not have a whole bookcase go.
Yeah, he did a very short run of these. I think there was like 500 of them. This was like a random album that came out like in 2012, but I'd made in 2010. It took a little while to come out. So then this was kind of the start of me be like sharing expressions, if that makes sense. These things were very like internal. But then as the years went on, it kind of expanded from being this purely therapeutic thing. I started to gain a more closer understanding with my thoughts and values on like what creativity is, in terms of it not really being something that is like attached to like my ego, if that makes sense. So it's like I kind of just see myself as being like a part of nature, and I learn these tools to kind of like open my headspace up in order to receive things and then transmit them in the same way that the universe does anything. It expresses itself in everything wherever you look. So I'm just part of this kind of like line. So I started to develop my understanding of creativity, my personal understanding of creativity through that, which many people say in many different ways. And then it became to widen, and it was no longer about like just this very much like, I'm very unhappy, I'm going to now do this thing in order for like this direct kind of therapy. It actually then began just to broaden in terms of like, it's fun as well. So it was just like, it's fun. And also just yeah, it's fun just to play in a big sandbox of things, and just like my curiosity massively opened in terms of experimentation and working with other people, like in terms of like bands and things like this, and working with other art forms, like making friends like who like we probably talk about later, who are like dancers and things like this, and having these kinds of connections. So it's the whole like therapeutic aspect is still there and always will be there, but it kind of, I came out of myself into the world a bit more. But it's still it's still a thing that's like interesting in my mind. Does that make any sense? It started off being in the gym and then it got here. I don't know if it made any sense.
That was great. That was great. I think it's really interesting. And I think, how do you feel, yeah, moving beyond it now being for audiences, or how do you, yeah, you've got so many different approaches. How do you feel that people engage with your work? What, yeah,
it's really interesting. It's super interesting. And I kind of grew up with these very kind of maybe like dogmatic artistic values. And then as the years have gone on, they've changed. But sometimes sometimes they're a bit of a battle. And this course is very much attached to that as well. Like but I find it interesting, like in terms of like art and creativity, like resting on your laurels is the worst thing in the world, because then you would just, whatever you make, you would bore yourself if you just rest on your laurels and like, this is what I do and that's safe and this is what. So I quite like, if I have like a really strong value of something, I quite like to just challenge that completely. Like if I'm like, yes, this is what it is, like 5 minutes later, I'm like, but what if I just do it the complete other way and something more interesting will come out? So when I was younger, I had this very much like, I was very inspired by the thought of considering an audience is like a knife to the heart of creativity. As strong as that sounds, that thought process has got me, is part of not where I am now, because I'm not really anywhere. I'm just a person in a room talking into a phone. But like that process has helped me a lot. But if I just have that, I wouldn't be on this course. That wouldn't even make any sense, because then I'm now in crits and people are looking and saying, oh, why don't you try this, why don't you try that, blah blah blah. And it was never like I was always open to audiences. It's one of them things, like trying to set, no matter what happens, it's good to think about audiences, it's also good not to. It's still a thing I think about. So in the end of the day, there's a strain in my work about like mortality and things like this, and I always just think like, take all these things in, use them to your benefit, make your brain, twist your brain a bit and things like this. But then at the end of the day, you could die in 3 days. So if you knew you was going to die in 3 days, you'd want to look at what you've done and be like, actually that's what I'm actually happy with. So it depends. It's like a not even compromise. It's just it's a weird thing. It's a weird thing, and I very much enjoyed photography. Has been the practice that has had. I find it interesting. Different mediums work in really different ways. Like in terms of what I've gone through with like photography, I've been really lucky to be on 2 courses. I've just started photography really in the grand aspect of things in terms of how I've considered doing it for years and years and years and years. I'll do it for 30 years if I'm alive. Longer than that, however long until I die. But like 2 years is nothing. So initially I got onto this course called the Dartmoor Summer School of Photography, which was that I've not even got long enough to even talk about how great that was. and then I've got onto this course as well, and they're very different courses. Like one wouldn't describe itself as a course, this one would kind of describe itself as more of a program. Very different things. If you believe in the left and right side of the brain, which I don't really believe in, I think the science is a bit weird with that, but let's just say it is the left and right. Like the Dartmoor is more like the left and this is more the right, although this has got the right and some left. It's a do you know what I mean? So it's a bit, this is a bit more technical, and it's a bit more like, you know, industry leaders, what kind of things can get you work, all those kinds of things, which has been really cool. And even just the thought process of like crits and portfolio reviews, like I'd never had one of those until I started this. I never really properly knew what they were. So that doesn't really exist anywhere else. Well, not in terms of like music or anything like that, how I kind of see it. So it's been a challenge, but it's been a really good challenge as well. So the audience thing, I still believe that it's a knife to the heart to overly consider an audience in terms of like eventually choosing something that you doesn't sit with your heart, but it sits with an audience heart. Because at the same time, like whatever I really love and like, I'm not that weird. Like I'm weird, like everybody's weird, but like there are people who think like me, who like the things that I like. Like there's no way of all these humans that there's just like a person and they're going to think this pen's really great and no one else will think this pen is really great in the whole world. Like that doesn't even exist as a thing. You know what I mean? It's like there's about 4 million other people who think this pen is great. So it's like where are those people? And if you can get those eyes onto your work, but it's, you know, for me, it's just mainly about trying to be more of a vessel to the universe as a whole. Try and make work that makes me. The therapeutic aspect of it is just processing problems, not just like childhood, but just problems that you have as an adult and just growing up and all of these things. So it's a way of trying to process things in mostly quite an abstract way, but then from time to time they become little boxes. Then you wrap some paper around them, you're like, oh, that's a project there. But like as the time goes on, I'm seeing that things that I made in 2012, or like an album made in 2012, is very much connected to particular projects that I'm doing now, which are quite early on in development, but like those things are hugely connected. And in the last East Meets West I did, I think it was Claire Strand I was talking to, and we were discussing how those different mediums all really connect. But at the same time, there's lots of stuff that's just fun as well. So it's not even all that. The balance of life is like really serious or whatever, and then super fun. So in terms of photography, like I love the process of doing portraits that wouldn't necessarily be considered as some of my like quote unquote serious projects. Do you know what I mean? It's like just the process of going to someone's house and doing a portrait is like wouldn't me. But they're all things that I want to do. Yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling on now. I don't even know if I've answered your question.
No, you have. I mean, you've just touched on portraits, and maybe we can discuss your portraiture work, which is really strong and has a really great aesthetic and great use of natural light. And in particular, the series titled "Reimagining Soho House." Do you want to? How did that project start? What was that project about? What were the kind of do you want to talk us through what this project was about?
I'll just put a post-it note on the wall. If I don't mention the thing about having confidence with your technique, then bring me back to that. And that is part of this story.
Okay.
So there's a company called Beat Freaks based in Birmingham that I started doing some work for as an artist in residence. And I was supporting a group of young people for it was like a heritage project. What do I call it? Heritage projects? Not really. It was a project to reimagine the space of the Soho House, which is like a Matthew Bolton museum, the Industrial Revolution steam engine stuff, and it was just, and that's like planted in the middle of Handsworth, and that place at the time is very disconnected to the community of Handsworth. So this was a project of actually making those connections back together and telling some like untold stories about, especially, you know, women get like erased from stories all the time, and people of color and all of these kinds of things. So it was about helping those young people to figure out a way of reimagining the space, so changing things around, adding things. So the example in terms of those portraits, there's a room called, it's like Anne Bolton's sitting room, I think it's his daughter. So what we did is there's various different things in that room that's about local business women of color and their stories within that room, because it is kind of reflective on like Anne Bolton's got a history of herself that doesn't really, when you go in there at the time, it was like, you know, well, that's his daughter. It's like, oh yeah, he's got the great man and he has a daughter. But like she had her own stuff, like she had her own businesses and things like this. So it was about, so the idea was like to like literally put business women from the area like in the space. So those young people then, as part of that, they were like commissioning artists. So as part of that, they commissioned me to do these 3 portraits of 3 women that they got. The funny thing about that, because that was like the first time I'd had a commission. Well, first, there's really weird things about that. 2, that I have 3 portraits in a museum, which is just bonkers. 2, because it's just weird, because no one really they're like hidden in that museum as well. Like no one would really see them unless you go there. But now it's closed, so it's like, but it's wonderful. I really, really love that opportunity that even happened. It's very strange. But then but it was the first time I was like, I love doing portraits anyway, that process. But it was the first time I then was, so I just do that anyway. So that when I start, in terms of my learning about photography and learning about how to do it, I was just photographing friends and going and make whatever connections I'd made. I'd kind of say, oh, do you want to do a portrait session? And it was a really cool way of just getting to know people as well. Photography gets you out the house, and I really wanted to get out the house more. But like music is very much like I'm sitting in my studio and I'm like, yeah, da, 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 da. But photography is like, you've got to get out. So it's like really great. But like, I remember so it was my first like commission to do photography. So the funny thing, the camera that I made the decision to get a very simple camera with one lens, so with a lens that you can't take off. So I didn't want any choices when it came to my camera, really. It's a digital camera. I didn't want too many choices, because I wanted to learn photography in that way. Like the education came from listening to podcasts, and a couple of very specific ones, like the Small Voice podcast, is it called? Listening to that podcast and listening and watching a YouTube channel called The Art of Photography. Those 2 things were was the education. So I was generally going into people's spaces, having big like having chats with them, pretty casual, and then making a portrait. So with just this camera, that's all it was. So I was like, you know, we'd find a window and we'd do it that way. Like only one portrait I've ever done is been with lights, and that was because that was experimenting and I didn't really like it. But because I got paid to do this commission, it was all like, and I knew I had to like, the pictures had to take place on the days I was going to do it. Like, then I kind of panicked. I didn't trust that I would be able to do it. You know what I mean? Like, as if it was just like my mates, I could just come back the next day or whatever if something goes wrong or there's not enough light. So I turned up. It's funny because if anyone who I took pictures of then probably don't even know, but I realised this. But I turned up with this giant bag to all these places. And because I've got lights and stuff from like video and stuff, I turned up with this giant bag with like all this equipment in with my little camera. Because this was like my just in case bag.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, but if I can't get it right, I'm going to have to set up and blah, 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 blah. And in the end, all three of them, I took this giant bag, put the bag in the corner of their sitting room, and just took portraits how I would normally take portraits, and then dragged this giant bag with all this stuff that I like didn't even open back out again. And then that was like my learning of like, I don't need to carry this giant bag around and panic. Like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and natural light's fine. And I'm not like dogmatic about it. It's just like I'm very simple, and I kind of want to be really simple, so natural light works better for me in that way. So it's nothing against using lights or whatever, but for me that's a way of doing it. So yeah, so that was really good. And we had like an opening at the Soho House, which was really, really beautiful, and I had like a beautiful moment with the people, because I got to like see the reactions of the people who were in the portraits, like walk into the room and like see it for the first time. And that was like great. Like that was like a really special moment with like all of them, just seeing like people be really like proud that they were like in that space. Yeah. And just really proud of like how the portraits looked and things like this. And that's a very rare thing that I'd really experience that again in any kind of way, because lots of things about to occur for me to be in the room when they see it. And so yeah, so that was super fun, and I learned to have a bit of confidence with like my technique, in that sense of like, this is how I take photographs. I can challenge myself and do things in other ways, but it's okay. I feel like I'm on an all right path.
No, I think they're great. And yeah, I totally agree about kind of trusting your process, and you sticking to what works for you. And I think it really comes across in the work. I mean, I'm like interested in portraiture in general, but I was kind of interested. I think the participants look very strong and powerful. Was that on purpose? How do you talk to people when you're taking their portrait? Do you say a lot? Do you not say a lot? Do you give a lot of guidance? What is your, apart from the use of natural light, what's your kind of process in terms of you as the artist in that space and working with the participant?
Okay, so like one of my favorite things about it is that it's different all the time. So it's like I've got a bit of a process, but it kind of always depends on who I'm going to see. I kind of realized that my kind of, I guess my career's in half now. I don't know. So, well, I'm a social worker, so the process of going into a stranger's house and developing rapport and being able to have quite, not always like deep conversation, but just like being able to converse, but not being scared about going into anything quite deep. Like that's something on retrospect that I realized was really, really helpful for me, because the simple act of going into a stranger's house and then sitting on their sofa is very normal to me through my work as a social worker, because that's my whole job is based on that. And I feel like maybe if I hadn't had that, then maybe it'd be more difficult. I'm not sure, but it's definitely quite slow. Only a couple of portrait sessions that I've done have been very, very fast, where we've gone in, started taking photos pretty quickly, and then the first couple of photos, and that's it. That's quite rare. I would normally say, if I'm doing a portrait session, I was going to say, just I'm not going to say it's going to take 2 hours, but just let's give ourselves a 2 to 3 hour space of us being, just so you're free for that time. And we'll just start off quite casually. We'll have a cup of tea. We'll just have a cup of tea and chat. And then eventually we'll remember that we need to take photos. And then we'll take some photos, and then we'll chat more. So with some people, there's a lot of talking whilst taking photos. With some people, there's no talking, because I feel like with those, the particular portraits that come into mind where there's been no talking at all, that's when I've really realized that whatever the universe has done to get us two in that same room at that particular time was for a very specific reason, and they wanted to express something in that moment, and so did I. And that's happened a few times where it's just like there's nothing to say. They just want to. It's just there, and those times are really magical. Equally as to the other ones, but the process of that's really cool, because I will never rest. I could never rest on my laurels with that, because it's not about the lights. It's just about finding a moment. A lot of it comes in the editing process, obviously, when you're like looking for your moments that you want to choose. A lot of it can be reflected on terms of like how I feel in terms of the photos that I choose to get. You know what I mean? There's a complicated thing going on with portraiture. This, it's been spoken about by many people who are far more articulate than me about the relationship between a photographer and person. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really agree with, like, you can take a portrait, you can take a picture of like the real person. Like, no, it's just like a tiny jigsaw piece of a split second of them. But I often am more interested in the pictures of people that aren't readily available already. You know what I mean? So then it's generally in, I don't know. It's whatever my gut kind of goes with. And maybe that's a lot to do with things going on internally with me too. But very generally quite slow. I think all of that, and really I could have just said generally quite slow.
No, that was really great. I think, I should have mentioned before, your role as a social worker. I mean, I don't know how you have any time to do anything, Marley. You must be working literally every second of every day on either, your social work or making music or making pictures. But I think there's something really interested in, your role as a social worker, and then kind of using those skills in your approach to portraiture. I think that's really interesting. And you being comfortable going into people's spaces and talking to them. And I think it's really interesting. And it just makes me think of another piece of your work, which I think is really, really, really strong. And to me is your culmination of your various different parts coming together. And it's the video piece called Our Daughter. Do you want to talk a bit about how that looks and the spoken word element of it and the film? And I think it's really strong.
Oh, thank you. It's funny when you mention that, because I haven't thought about that for a while, that piece. So that was one of the rare times that I did some writing in terms of a spoken word piece that was kind of about something slightly outside of me. Like, everything else that I've written is very much like this. If that makes any sense, do you know what I mean? Like, but that's like, I don't have a daughter, for one, so it's like this kind of story kind of outside of me. It's hard to explain about saying it, but I'm definitely not going to say it on this. I'm not going to say it, but in terms of the actual poem. But I remember I wrote it, and a lot of the themes were just about how, in terms of parenting, you can have like a really good intention for a child, but in terms of having to let a child like make mistakes and things like this, and the same with humans as well. Like, people need to make mistakes to learn and stuff. And that whole thing of, you always want to put a blanket over your child as much as possible, but then that can actually have a really bad effect, and actually it's your own anxiety that's doing that. Do you know what I mean? So I wrote this piece, and then I messaged the people in the video. Like, I messaged my friend, who, ironically, she was someone she's a social worker as well. So I studied social work with her I studied social work in 2013 to 15. So we studied together for a couple of years, and she'd just had a daughter. So I messaged her, and I just messaged her, not to say that I'm making a video or blah, blah, blah. I just sent her the words and says, do you feel anything from these words? and she messaged back and was like, yes, totally. This is like exactly how I kind of feel as someone who's had their first child with her partner. And it's like, oh my God, I need to protect this precious thing so much. And she's like, yes, I'm very likely to have these kinds of thoughts as they get older, you know, like putting our own anxieties onto this child and actually it being not beneficial in the end, but it's from good intentions. So then I was like, oh, okay, cool. So do you want to I'm going to make like a video version of that poem. Do you want to be in it? And she said, yeah. So I went round to her house, and it was her partner, and her child. A funny thing about that video is that I wanted it to be, it was basically the video. It's just the child in the middle sitting on a sofa and the two parents looking at the camera. That's all it is. But I misjudged the difficulty of getting a very small child to sit very still and look at a camera. So now I'm going to break the wall now. So if you're like, oh my God, it's really deep and blah, 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 I'm going to kind of ruin it maybe by giving you the behind the scenes of how that happened. So we tried it for age. It wasn't really working. She was very like, because she's tiny, she must have been 1 or even younger than 1. I'm not sure. But she just wanted to like get up and blah, blah, blah. I needed her to sit and look in the camera for 60 seconds, which is basically impossible. So what we then ended up doing is underneath the camera, there is an iPad and the iPad is showing Peppa Pig.
That's how you work with kids.
That's how we did it. So when you watch the video, it just looks like this kid is very like just deeply looking into the camera. But actually she's looking just below the camera, but the camera's far enough away that you can't really see that. So she's watching Peppa Pig to keep her still. So I'm sorry that I've ruined that video for you.
No, it doesn't ruin. I think I'm just looking at the still from the film, the video piece, and again, really recommend people going onto Marley's website to look at all of his work. But yeah, in particular, I think this is really strong. The engagement back and the gaze back from the 3 participants, the family in it, is really strong. And as a viewer, it's it all works so well. With the spoken word poetry as well. Yeah, I think it's really strong. I mean, do you see, have you made any other pieces like that where you're kind of combining photography, film? Because it's also such a nice, just one static image.
Yeah.
It's like a moving photograph, basically. But yeah, combining that with spoken word. Have you thought about doing some more, or are you working on anything else?
Yeah, definitely. Like I have other pieces that are kind of ready in my mind, like completed pieces, and it's just about coming round to thinking of like the visual idea and doing it. And I very much stay in a very simple camp. Like I'm very much keep things super, super simple. Some of that is limitations of what I can do with one camera and things like this. And I actually really like that. Like the more limitations I have, the better sometimes, because it's kind of like, without the choices, then your mind has to like kind of like bend and think. So yeah, that's definitely something I'm going to do more of. There's a couple more in my head that I'm going to do in the future, but everything is just connected. So like, I don't know, every piece is connected to other ones in kind of abstract kind of ways. It's all one body of work that I'll do until I die, basically. I know I mentioned death a lot, but I mean in a really positive way. It's all a body. That's all it is. So yeah.
Great. We've had some really interesting questions. I'm just going to go through, and there's one about kind of your multidisciplinary approach. I'm just going to try and find it. Bear with me. Okay, yeah, here we go. It's from Anna Lerner, and it says, "I'm really impressed by how multidisciplinary you are, and also haven't done things by half. Do you feel that this means you're compromising developing a particular practice, or it adds to what you do?"
I don't think it compromises a particular practice. What I'd say is I've kind of accepted that the work that I do keeps changing and I'm doing different things, which I see in my abstract, silly way of like, it's one body of work and blah, 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 blah. But that's not something that is generally fits within capitalism and commercial interest. But I'm not massively interested in that. But that comes in where it comes in different ways. So it doesn't compromise anything for me internally. There's always things I wish I could, like, I really want to, like, I want to learn the piano a lot, but I know that I get distracted by things. So I'm always changing. Like, if I was like just a piano player, then I would be where I want to be with piano, but I'm not just a piano player. So it's, to me, there's no difference making a photograph and making a song. There's no difference from in my heart. Yeah. But at the same time, it just depends on what you want, because I've come to terms with the fact of, in fact, a better way of explaining it, like in a shorter way, like when I was just releasing music, I saw it even amongst just the patterns of music. So I know that if I make a song where it's my voice and I'm like rapping and there's music, or my face is in it, those are the things, which they're quite rare, those are the things that get the most traction, the most people are sharing it, and all of those kinds of things. But that is not what I always want to make. It never will be what I always want to make. So I'll often, and the things that get the least amount of traction or interest are actually oftentimes the things that mean the most to me. Like, I think a few years ago, like I released something where I was rapping, and it was like, this is like an expression. And I kind of get social. I get it's like Instagram. If you see a picture of portraits do better than other things because it's someone's face, people can make those connections. But then I think after that, I made like a video which was actually means loads to me. It's really like for how internally what it means to me is quite a lot to it. And it's from a song that I made many moons ago called "Do You Know Where Your House Is?" And it's just a camera pointing at a very random kind of shed in my nan's back garden, a very interesting looking greenhouse. And it's just that for 7 minutes. And I love that. To me, that's like my favorite thing that I've ever done. Nobody cares about that. Like, no one's really, so I've come to terms with, I'm not like commercially viable in that sense. So, if you want to say compromise, maybe I compromise that side of things. But I'm also happy with the very, very slowness of how I have gained kind of I don't like the word connections, but do you know what I mean? And kind of developed. And even just talking to you on this screen and being part of East Meets West, and even being on anybody's radar, and people sending me really nice messages saying, oh, I've seen you work and let's chat. And lots of that's happened through photography. So my very, very slow way I like that, and it's going to be very, very, very slow. But I'm in no rush. But I'm in a lucky position to be in no rush. So I've got a privilege there, which comes from having a job that I really enjoy too. So I love social work, and that gives me not even a safety net, because I love it. So that gives me something where I can not have to worry too much about, like, money from art isn't equal to like me having bread to eat. You know what I mean? So that's a privilege as well. But then the social work and the art and everything is all mixed together. It's all one in an abstract way in my mind. And I only work part-time now. So that was like a thing I did a year and not even a year. Was it even that long ago? I don't know who I'm talking to. There's no one over there. But like, I went part-time with social work, like, so I kind of like halved my money and was like, I can just about afford that, and I'm going to do much more art. So I only work a few days a week now, 2 to 3 days a week. But that's a privileged position for me to even be having these like lofty thoughts about, you know, this work having to be from the part, or being open to the universe, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of privilege that comes with that I definitely recognize, because there's some brilliant artists, like people who I have the most respect for in the world, who actually the art is the thing that has to pay them as well, and they have to make these constant decisions about compromise and things like this. Like, photography was the first time I came across this whole term about like commercial work versus personal work. Like, I was like, what is that even about? Like, I didn't even understand. I was listening to podcasts, listening to these things, and then I was like, isn't all the work personal? What is this? Oh, some people have to do commercial work to then do blah, blah, blah. And I don't judge any of it, because there's like, well, that's what they have to do. So it's like, so I'm lucky to not have to have those commercial whatever thoughts, but at the same time, through how I've been doing things very, very slowly, I've started to get little commissions and things like this. So it's just slowly edging up, and I can just kind of enjoy the process, because in the end of the day, this whole thing is just about process, isn't it? You do it, you process, you love the process, and then you die one day, and then hopefully you've done something, you know, you've made someone smile, or you've had some impact on someone, and then you've tried to like save your own life constantly as you grow up.
Great. This is great. Thank you for being so open and sharing so much, Marley. I think we're still going, but it's been really fascinating to hear so much, and especially about, and you're so right, you know, it is all about process. It is all about process, and I think, yeah, being multidisciplinary, you can respond to things in different ways, and each part of your practice is appropriate to respond to different circumstances and different opportunities to make work. I think, should we move on to talk about the kind of East meets West experience in general, and how you found, as you were saying at the start, kind of the crits nature of it, sharing your work, the feedback. Have you enjoyed it? Has it been uncomfortable? Has it pushed your work on?
Yeah, I've definitely enjoyed it a lot. It's definitely had uncomfortable moments, but those uncomfortable moments I treasure. So I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much if I didn't have uncomfortable moments. If it was just this kind of smooth sailing thing that was perfect and everything anyone said to me was great, I would have been like, well, that was whatever. So it's been really, really good for that. Like, just the process of having a crit. I remember the first week when we did it, and I kind of felt bad because I applied. I've not even told you guys this, but I applied talking about a particular project, which is changing loads, and it's all I'll finish it in about 10 years' time, in reality. But I was talking about this project, and then when I went through the crit, I talked about this project, and I realised it is so early in development that I can't really even talk about it. And I was like, okay, I've got to talk for the rest of the sessions. I kind of got to talk about like another project. But that project, the first one, is the one I applied for. So I was kind of like, oh, he's a bit rubbish. Like, we were interested in that other project that read really well, but actually that's a really slow project that's going to take many years to complete. But I remember thinking, I could not imagine being a very, very young artist and having portfolio reviews and crits, but that's only because of the context of me being an old man and all of and so I developed an idea of my value around creativity and art kind of in my own mind through inspiration from other places. But I couldn't imagine going through that process and being pulled apart all the time and being told to explain yourself and things like this, which isn't a bad thing. But I had a resilience to that through experience. So I was like, oh my God, how are these 19-year-olds doing it? I was like, it's amazing. If you can be a young artist and go through the like art world in that nature, and obviously that's very specific to photography and some other things like that. Like, that's really great. Like, there's people on the course, so I'm like, wow, like how are you doing that at that age? And it's incredible. So for me, like, there were some bits that were challenging. I was just like, what? And then there were other bits, and then I kind of learned the same lesson that I learned when I was listening to lots of podcasts, is that every podcast I was listening to, different artists had very different values and systems about how they thought about stuff. And technically they are all correct. and they are all right, which means they're all wrong, which means it's just about finding the core. So it's the similar. So as we were going through, it's interesting to see one reviewer say something about someone's work, and then 4 hours later, another reviewer say something completely different to that. And then another one will say something completely different. So then it's just about how you can kind of take and chat and have things genuinely challenge you. Like, don't take things personal, because everything is just about your own, every thought that you have is about your own context to your thoughts. Like, the thoughts that I have and everything I've been saying today aren't necessarily true or anything. They're not true to people watching. They'll be true to some of them, but it's not like some like wide truth. It's just like the context of my own understandings of things to have opinions. So it's been really good, really interesting, really challenging, and it's been good. My mind has been opened to kind of where I can kind of like push my work even more. Like the one we had on Sunday, was it Sunday? Sunday's today. Saturday was yesterday. When we had Saturday was really, really good for me in terms of like, okay, so you've done this project now that I thought was finished, but actually we can push it to another level. And I was like, yes, this is kind of how I can. And having that was really good, because it kind of pushed it away from it just being like a photography project, how I kind of think of photography, but more pushing that into how I think of art as well. So it kind of just added that extra kind of layer. And then also just general stuff about like industry and like how industry works, and if you want your work to be shown, because as much as I have these thoughts about where the core of creativity comes from and blah 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 blah, I still do want to share these things. I'm in that space now, and I do want people to see the work, and I do want those kinds of things. And it's good to, if you're going to earn any money from it, that's good too, because that money can go straight back into the art, because all my money that I make from art goes straight back into art, and most of my other money that I make from social work goes into art. So it's a good thing. We all need to buy things, you know what I mean? So yeah, so it's been really, really good. And doing that and doing Dartmoor Summer School of Photography has been I feel like weirdly, this might not really be true, but I feel like I don't need to do anything else in photography in terms of like courses and programs. I feel like Dartmoor Summer School of Photography covered this and this covered this, and it's kind of made this whole. And all I've got to do is like look and remember those two experiences, because they're both very different, and they're both brilliant. And in terms of just meeting other photographers and things like this is great, because that's when I first started photography, I didn't really know any photographers. When I went to Dartmoor Summer School of Photography, that was the first time I met any photographers ever, which is very strange. Like I never really met any photographers, and I was like in Devon with like 30 of them just for a week, which was really weird, but really brilliant. There's just like an odd scenario of events. But yeah, did I answer the question? I can't remember.
Yeah. We've just got a question here, and so the two courses that Marley's just been talking about is the East Meets West program, which this is part of, and the Dartmoor Summer School of Photography, which also I can definitely recommend. And also Marley's just told you how great it was. Lots of people.
It got this year, unfortunately. It's because of obviously COVID, but it will be back on next year.
Yeah, so people have a look out for that, because I've heard lots of great things about that. If anyone has any questions for Marley, if you just want to put them in here. But I just wanted to talk to you, Marley, about a project that you're currently working on, the Dreaming Tower Ballroom project, which looks interesting and exciting. Do you want to let everyone know about what's going on there and what your role is within that?
Okay, so what time are we on, by the way?
We're on 56 minutes.
56. Okay, the time it's going to cut off in like a second. Then.
Oh, is it?
It's gonna cut off in like 4 minutes. So is it better? I thought I was going to be one of the short ones, and I've been one of the long ones.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Do you want to just quickly tell everyone now about that?
So that's there is a ballroom by the sort of the Edgbaston Reservoir in Birmingham. It's called the Tower Ballroom. It's been there since the late 1800s. It's still there now, but it's not really been used for the last couple of years, and it's likely to get knocked down by the looks of things. So with that project, it's like a heritage project that's about collecting memories. It's a big public call out for people to send in their stories, send in their videos, send in their pictures, and all these kinds of things. In that project, there is a handful of artists who have been commissioned to respond to the Tower Ballroom. It's also about imagining futures as well, because we really want to not just collect heritage and say, collect all this stuff and say, oh, okay, now knock it down. It's like, we want to project a future onto it as well, because we want it to stay, and it's a really good space that could be used. It's had a lot of culture. Like the late 1800s to now is quite a long time. It's quite a long time. So I've got a commission through that to respond to that, and that's going to be a complete it's a sound piece where it starts at the moment. It may have a visual towards the end. With that sound piece, I am going along the thought of, you know, with spaces, it's about people who inhabit the spaces, not about like what actually happens in there, like in terms of like musicians or things like this. It's about the people. It's the people who make the culture. So I am collecting a pool of sound, which is just audience sounds that's from in the Tower Ballroom. So I've downloaded all of the YouTube audio that's anything that's on YouTube that's ever been recorded from inside the Tower Ballroom. I'm cutting out everything that's musicians, bands playing, blah, 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 cutting all that out. It's just audiences, just people shouting stuff, just clapping, just weird things that audience do in crowds, collecting all of those little pieces, mapping it onto lots of like keyboards and stuff, and then I'm going to basically play the crowd. And so it's the crowd I've got the earliest is from 1983 to 2017. So the whole idea is to have, it interests me to kind of make a piece where you've got someone shouting out in a crowd in 1983 in like some kind of loop or whatever, and then someone in 2017 at a boxing match shouts something out, and all of these sounds kind of like collected together, but it's all audience sounds. So that's what that is at the moment. So I'm kind of working on that for the next month or so. But that was like a completely open brief where I could choose to do whatever I wanted, which was really, that's a nice thing about multidisciplinary stuff as well, because it's kind of like, what do I want to do there? And the people that commissioned me were like, yeah, you could do what you want. So I chose that. So it may turn into a visual after, but yeah. But it's going to cut off in a second.
I know, we're coming down to our last minute.
Yeah.
But maybe that's a good place for us to finish on then. But that sounds really, really interesting. And yet, I know there's lots of other things happening as part of that project. So if people want to get involved or to see what's going on, yeah, just search on Instagram and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, Marley, that was brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing so much about your process, your interests, your broad-ranging practice. Thanks to everyone for joining us. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. We're coming down to 40 seconds. There is, just quickly, this week we've also got in conversation the brilliant Mariam Wahid on the 28th, Nicola Morley on the 30th, who's also great, and then Tamden Green, who is also brilliant, on the 2nd of August. So yeah, thank you so much, Marley. Thank you for joining us. I feel like I'm on like a news channel with the
ones in your ear saying, we're going to commercial now.
Bye. Yeah, Marley, thank you, everyone.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Bye.
Bye.